In this segment of the Elly interview, I had a chance to speak with Professor Ulrich Krull, the principal of UTM. And if you're looking for an inspirational story for success, this one is chock full of logic, discipline, and creativity. So please enjoy this segment with Professor Krull. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And so like Elly is sharing stories and people's personal stories about personal and around personal finance. And I wanted to start off asking you, what type of student were you when you were an undergrad?
So when you say type of student,
Like
I presume,
a good student, a bad student?
would anybody ever admit to that?
Well, you know.
I was a student.
Rebellious student, you know.
I was a very focused student,
Yeah.
working in the area of the sciences. Sciences have been something that had interested me since I was a child, and I particularly liked the interface between physical sciences and life sciences. So if I looked at an insect, as many kids do, it wouldn't just be a question of, oh, isn't that cool, it's got wings and it can fly. And I wonder what actually drives it forward, what kind of processes behind it actually make it happen. And that's something that has been in my psyche for a very long time. And in a sense, it will explain why I have a sense of curiosity, because I'm always asking, how do things work and how can I take different ideas and put them together and move it forward? And so when I was a student, I was very focused. I was a commuter student. I lived in Etobicoke, and we would just go to the University of Toronto. I think that'll be familiar to most people. So I'm a U of T grad at the undergrad, and actually grad level also. I do my graduate work here at the university. And the overall lifestyle was you would commute downtown and then commute home and spend very little time on the St. George campus, which is where I was. It was just there to get the labs done, hit the library when you needed to do it, and then the rest of it you would drag home with you. There was no internet at the time. And so if you wanted to study something, you pick up the library books, and you were healthy because you're carrying a ton of books on your back all the time.
Right, I forgot about that. Yeah, we've gotten so used to having everything at our fingertips. I remember, I too had to go and loan books from the library, stacks of them. Yeah, that's great. I think that's it's good for students to hear that, being disciplined and curious go well together.
yeah. And I'll put you, just really for the audience, that my experience with the university is what one would have considered the traditional experience. I came in from a high school. High school had maybe 2,000, 2,500 students, so I was one of the better students in that particular cohort. And you come in saying, I can do this, and the first thing you realize is, this is a different experience. Wow. So I had my challenges in first year trying to rethink how I would study, how I would learn, and it took over a year just to figure that part out. Okay. But once you figure it out, then things change, and you have a new, if you will, way of studying, a new sense of what your responsibilities are, and you find your equilibrium.
Yeah, I think for most first years it's a transition period, understanding that making that switch from being a high school student to a first year university student when you were mostly independent and your time is your own and you have to manage that. Before you had a more rigid structure, now you have to kind of, so it requires a lot of discipline, I think.
So nothing has changed in that sense
over
the years?
No, nothing has. Yeah. I think for most undergrads, they go through that transition phase. Now, you spoke of challenges, but Elly focuses on financial concerns and issues. And as an undergrad back then, did you have any specific financial concerns, or were you thinking about money, or did money ever enter your mind when you were thinking about what you want to study? And
I don't think anyone can go into a university situation or a college situation where you're expected to pay a tuition and not be thinking about the money. Where's the money going to come from? In my particular situation, my parents had aspirations for me to go into a profession, into dentistry. And that would have been quite expensive even in those days.
Right.
But my father worked actually at the University of Toronto in dentistry. He was one of the technical support people working with the senior students in terms of metal work, bridges, crowns, things like that. It was always interesting because, as an aside, the technologies they use are the same technologies that are used in the jewelry business. So I learned how to make jewelry. You can actually sell jewelry and make some money.
Side hustle.
And this is all part of, I would say, the student experience. If you're limiting yourself only to your academic work, you're not, in a sense, receiving the value of both your university education and what the broader world is offering to you. You have to be willing to try new things. And for me, this was a new thing, but it was more or less guaranteed. I had the expert who knew how to do it and tutoring me along. And then it became more a question not of the technical work, but of my own expression in terms of creativity. So what could I create in jewelry that was unique, and I would custom make it for individuals, usually in the family, right? They would like to see something specific. And so that was a lot of fun. But as I say, it's just an aside is one of many different directions that you can go in. And so ultimately, if you take a look at how, I've in a sense moved through the years in the finances. When it started, I had my parents as, if you will, the guarantors. In fact, they paid part of my tuition coming in. Because my father was working in the university, there was also a relationship with the university. Employees would have a discount in terms of tuition fees, and it would really be a function of what programs you're in. At the end, I did not qualify in my chalk carving, as you need for dentistry, in the artistic side, and I'll put it on. In historical tape, I wasn't particularly interested anyhow. I couldn't see myself.
Now it's documented.
Yeah, now it's documented. I couldn't see myself playing around in other people's mouths for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, it just wasn't me. I was much more interested in that curiosity. And I had met a number of individuals even early on in my career that were inspiring in terms of the science and the research association in science and all of that. Then first year you couldn't do any research, but you would hear stories about things that were happening. And the University of Toronto has some very interesting individuals in it, has had for many decades, who are leaders in their fields. And so you can be inspired by the people that you meet. When I had my first year chemistry lectures, it was by John Polanyi, the Nobel Prize winner. And so it kind of rubs off and it creates an excitement. And that's part of why you come to the University of Toronto. It's those types of people that you meet. But because of that safety buffer of my parents, in a sense, always being the backstop, and then in a sense having that discount, the relationship I had was that I would be responsible for everything other than the tuition. And so I paid for my books and the transportation and all the things that happened to happen there. And it was, in a sense, a deal. A good deal financially, but a relationship with a family where there's a pact. They would support me, but not entirely. And I would have to put something into this from the standpoint of the skin in the game. And everyone's committed to this particular goal. Right? And you have to keep in mind also that this is so much specific to family culture. I come from a German background. My parents immigrated in, I guess, just the very end of the 1950s. 59 is when I got here. I would have been 3 or 4 years old, something like that. So I've grown up in Canada. But that's not their experience. And my home experience would have been one of, you're expected to perform. It's not quite the same in different cultures. It's not a matter of performing and being the best. The expectation is you do the best that you can. But if you're not applying yourself, then you're not doing your job. Question is not whether you're the best in the class, but rather are you the best that you can be? And so that's the pact. As the parents provided some financial resources, and I, in a sense, complemented that. We have an agreement. I'm going to do the best that I can, and so I tried.
So were you good at? So you had to find a part-time job, I would imagine.
Yep, I had the opportunity locally. There was a woman who was managing part of a team that worked in a packaging plant. And so I started working with that particular team. And then my next door neighbor was a friend of mine, another male. His parents were working in a large-scale manufacturing plant that would take Johnson & Johnson products and whatever, bottle them, and they'd get distributed. So I started working in that packing plant, learned how to be a blue-collar worker and driving a tow motor and all the things that one does. And then they found out in that particular plant that I was going to university and studying chemistry. And they had a problem in their analytical quality control lab that somebody had an illness, and they needed somebody to step in urgently. So I was recruited from the floor to go up to the elitist chemical lab, and that's my first experience in terms of chemistry being applied in industry.
So you got a big break there.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see, and it at least gave me an exposure to industry. But I went back not so much into that particular area. I found something much more attractive, and I think a number of our students have found it also, lifeguarding.
Oh, yeah?
Get you out the door, wonderful, sunny days. I did outdoor work, yeah. In the winter, it's kind of boring. You have to do indoor pools. And most of the summers I would work, and then trying to balance out that sort of academic study against work. That continues to be a problem.
Yeah, that's one thing I think I see a lot of students struggling with that, because they're struggling to reach class on time, hand in assignments on time, because they are trying to balance work and their studies as well. So how did you cope with that?
Well, I did it, again, with the luxury of having some backstop.
Right.
I wasn't under a great deal of financial duress. I had my responsibilities, but it wasn't full load, if you will.
Right.
And so I had the luxury, I suppose, of choosing the times I would work from the standpoint of the extra work during the week. Weekends usually was not work. I could choose particular times and evenings, for example, to do pool duties. And it would be spread out on the basis of, it's almost like, I guess, temporary teacher if you get into the high school, sub-teacher, substitute. I would basically substitute for others that had a more regular schedule, and then I could pick and choose the times and fit it into my schedule. So if I had a term test coming up, if I had an exam or an essay due, I could work around that.
Right, right. So when you did earn income from those side jobs, and you seem to have had a good work ethic, what type of money personality would you say you had? Like, are you very sensible, or did you splurge? I'm sensing that maybe you were sensible. I want to say.
You want to say. That's very kind of you. So yeah, sensibility, because there was a goal.
Right.
And you have
so you're very focused and goal oriented. Yeah.
But I'll flip this around, because, and this will happen to many students going through also. Mind you, today's student typically will have 4 or 5 years. If we look at the average sort of graduation time, which I think somewhere around 5 years now. In our day, it was you did 4 years. It was a 4-year program. You did the 4 years, and there was no question about it. But partway through that, I became engaged. And so that changes the perception also. Now you're starting to plan for your first place to live.
Absolutely,
Couldn't afford a house. Nobody can even today, but even those days you didn't save money to buy a house. But you started to collect your money together so that you could get your apartment and get the furniture that you required and all those things. So suddenly there's another layer of complexity in the finances.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate, because my wife, who is a computer systems analyst, she actually had a good paying job by the time we graduated.
Oh, that's great.
She worked for the Toronto Harbour Commissioner running their computer systems. That meant that I again had the financial stability, and our agreement was she would work and put me through school as best as she could. I would then earn money on the basis in graduate school, for example, after graduation at the undergraduate. That money would be rolled into the household finances, but she was the main income earner for some years as I completed my PhD. And so that worked out quite nicely, but at the end of the undergraduate, really the last 2 years of the 4 years, things were a little different again in terms of savings. And I'll put you that the focus was there, but from the standpoint of splurging, I will share with you, I did splurge on something. And I think the key message here is that it wasn't, if you will, unilateral. It wasn't something saying, well, it's my money and I'm going to spend it. No, at that time, being engaged, the commitment was already there. It's our money.
All right.
But I went to my wife-to-be and said to my parents also, so that everybody would know, everybody's in the pack, right? What I'd like to do is purchase one of the early computers that came on, because I wanted to learn that technology. And the computers, when they first came out, most people won't even remember the PET computer, the Commodore systems and all of that. They used to work with cassette tape drives to store your information, right? It would do it as sound signals, bits and bytes.
I know the floppy disk.
Well, this predates the floppy disk.
That's
this
as
literally,
far back as I
it's like a
know.
music cassette. You put
Right.
it into a cassette
Okay,
player, and it would
okay.
actually record in digital sound,
Wow.
your coding and things like that. It worked, but those early machines, they were designed in such a way that you could access all of the main board components. So you could, from ports, actually get into the CPU very easily. Simple coding, didn't have lots of buffers because
So
it wasn't
you
very
can hack
complicated.
easily.
And it wasn't so much hacking.
Oh.
It was, well, you have the right. Hacking to me means
Yeah.
you're breaking into
breaking
something.
it. No, yeah.
Yeah,
But you have
but
access.
you have access, exactly.
Let's use the right terminology. Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do is two things. One, set up the computer system to model some of the things I was starting to do in
Wow.
class. I had started research projects and wanted to model some of that, and the mathematical computations are very tedious, but a computer could do them fairly simply. And you can also computer generate graphics, so you can actually demonstrate what it is you're trying to do. But the other aspect was to learn how the boards work. Can you understand the electronics, the wiring, and can you build your own wiring to supplant that? And so the usual that one starts with, can you make a bell ring or whatever else? Then I set up various things around the house, alarms,
Really?
tripwires,
Wow.
and whatever else, burglar alarms,
Yeah.
and you could make your coffee in the morning, would turn it on automatically. All these things today nobody even thinks about.
Right.
But in those days it was all new, how to use it as a switching technology. And that gave me the background I needed to actually go into graduate studies and start working in the area that I did.
That's phenomenal.
So it's an investment.
But so that
it's
even your
splurgy.
splurge was sensible.
Yeah, there you go.
That was a sensible splurge. We spoke a little, well, emailed a little bit before, and you were talking about how the financial landscape has changed, where you had to physically walk into a bank, and now everything you could do online. And I just wanted to get your take on how do you think that has impacted, like, your story personally? Has it? I'm getting, like, again, a sense from you that you're pretty goal-oriented, you're focused, and you have a sense of direction. So I want to find out, did that have any influence in terms of how you spend or save, or did it have any impact on making other splurges in the future?
So I think your summary is correct. It is goal-oriented. It's also very structured. So the way that I have things laid out in my mind is compartmentalization. And in particular for finance, I like that particular approach because it means that you're buffering your risk. We'll have a certain amount of money that's available for things, not so much splurging, we don't splurge too much, but a certain amount of money available for targeted areas. So I want to save for a car. I have a separate account, and I put money into it, much like one would in any retirement account that goes towards the car. And we have a cycle. We know that a car will last from 5 to 7 years in terms of its performance, depending on who you buy it from, what the manufacturer is. So the account fills up,
Right.
and then it has a buffer associated with it. You spend down part of it, and there's always a little bit more there in case you require repairs or whatever else
Right,
happen. And that's the account for the car. You do not touch it for anything but the car. You do not dip into it for this vacation or whatever. It's there for the car. And then we have an account like that for, if you will, household repairs. What happens if the furnace breaks down? It's a $10,000 cost. What happens if you have to re-roof because a storm came by? There's an emergency account, and then we call it the appliance account, right? In case of need, right? And so things are just compartmentalized like that. And it means that you can take your operating monies and put it to the side, and you can take your savings and understand exactly where they are and what the risk is. So
Right.
some savings are mutual funds, and some are more, the absolute guaranteed types of interest.
Right.
There's working capital
Yeah.
account, and that doesn't make much interest at all. It's 0.1% like everyone else, right? But it's
Yep.
spread out in terms of the risk and how it's going to be used. So it's goal-oriented, but very structured in terms of approach.
So I think if I had to get a model, reference, I think you would be a very good typical model, and then we can base other people off of you. Because having that, and this is what we want people to get into, actually, having that type of mindset. And I think the fact that you're very structured, you're very logical, you're very practical in that way. And when you're dealing with finances, you need those three components, yeah? And without it, you will be meandering along the way.
And there's one other piece I'm going to add, and you haven't asked me, and I'm sure you're going to get to it. You have a list of questions. But let me interject it now,
Absolutely.
because it's all part of the same package. And the question really is one as to what kind of risk you're going to take with your money. And the risk to me is going to come in two categories. One, your investment risk, that's fine. I don't worry about that so much because I'm very conservative. You can tell if you're goal-oriented, you're going to be relatively conservative because you can't reach your goal by being a speculator. The flip side of that, I worry for both my family and our students how much money they're accepting in credit and the payback. That's another form of risk to me. And the aspect I just wanted to share with you, and again, you have to remember, I come from a buffered situation. I didn't have to take much in terms of loans to make things happen. But the sort of mantra in my family was always, you do not spend any more, including credit, than you already have in the bank. If you can't cover it, you do not borrow that money. And so there are going to be times where that doesn't work. Most people consider buying a car to be a significant expense. Well, because I have a car account, we don't buy the car till we have the cash, and it's bought on cash, right? And get a good deal that way too. You don't have carrying charges and whatnot. But large expenditures like a house, that's where you have to find that balance. That's where it would irritate me because I don't have the cash in the bank, right? Again, just to put it in perspective, I was very fortunate because of being so goal-oriented and because of the nature of my particular experience trying to invent things, trying to understand things. Early on in my graduate career, I already had some significant technologies that industry was interested in acquiring. And so they bought it out. I have a whole series of patents. By the time I graduated with my PhD, I had half my house paid for, my new car was there, everything was because of the income off the inventions.
That's incredible.
Right? But, well, it's, again, a very fortunate and unusual, probably, circumstance in terms of people moving forward. But it meant I could apply fundamentally my philosophy that, you don't overextend yourself in credit. So even though we had to borrow half the house of half the price of the house to move forward, the amount of income and the stability of the income was such that we knew there was no problem at all. We didn't worry about paying off the mortgage very quickly because it wasn't terribly expensive in terms of the borrowing costs, and everything just worked out.
You raised a really good point about debt. In previous generations, debt was seen as a bad thing. You just don't want to have debt, whether it be, now we categorize debt, good debt and bad debt. Before it was just bad. Everything was bad. We don't want to have, and I think there's been a generational shift, and because the financial landscape has changed so much, it actually may, in some cases, be advantageous to have good debt, the way that the system is set up now. So, before, when we were very practical, and it makes so much sense, why would you overextend yourself if you can't cover it? It just means that you're going to be in trouble later on, And this is not a concept that I think our students really fully grasp because they grow up in a different environment. And the concept of debt is not one that perhaps we have, where we think, okay, it's just, I don't want to have anything that says I'm owing anything, right? It's a generational change, I think, and it has a lot to do with the financial industry, the way they position credit cards, and of course it's advantageous to them, not so much the consumer. And so this is, I think, where students really need to kind of understand that concept. And the way you lay it out, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's not that difficult to understand. Spend less than you earn, save for a long time at a good interest rate, and voila, right? But each component of that can get so complicated. It is where you are, what your goals are, what your expectations are, who your friends are, what university you're at, what job you're capable of getting, right? So it, on the surface, is very straightforward. And like I said, you're a model where you apply that. You took that basic and you were able to apply it, not only in your finances, but obviously in your academic career, that sense of application and discipline and working towards a goal. And having that sense of creativity and curiosity, I think, was the thing that sealed the deal for you.
The icing. The
icing on the cake. Or I would say, I don't know if so much as it's at the icing, but I think it's the nucleus of what has propelled you, right? But yeah, so I think, the whole purpose of Elly is to get students to kind of understand really the implications of debt and, what it can mean for them, not only today, but later on, thinking of their future self rather than just thinking of themselves today. Because a lot of times there's this narrow instant gratification wins over delayed gratification. That's a thing that we, in this society, we want it now, we want it fast, we want it easy, we want it convenient. And in the past, it may not have been like that.
Yeah.
There were no avenues for that. So it's like a cultural shift as well, technological shift as well. And so
and
that's
a
why I
little
think...
bit addictive also if
Yes,
you're not
yes.
careful.
Yeah.
And that's
And-
how you get into trouble.
And that's why I think it's important for students to hear stories, especially like yours, where they can say, oh, there was a time when things were different and we could do that, and it can be as simple, but it does require dedication and discipline.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my final question for you would be, if you weren't, well, I'm not sure if this question would apply to you because
Would I be anything else?
What would you do? What would you do if you weren't a pro? Because it seems that you are doing what you wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Living the dream, as
Living
they
the
say.
dream, yes.
Or perhaps not in the administrative side. I don't think this is everybody's nightmare. No, I think I likely would have been in some form of creative
Right.
industry, probably in the sciences.
Yes.
Exactly what it would have been. I had opportunities both to enter academic as well as the industrial world when I finished my PhD. Could have been either track, and
Right.
either track is interesting and challenging, so who knows what would have come of it. I don't think the sort of sideline or the background creativity would have ever disappeared. It's just a
No,
question
yeah.
of how it expresses.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for
My
taking the
pleasure.
time to
Thank
be
you.
on the interview with us.